Hello, and welcome back to This Week I Tried, or TWIT for short. The premise is simple, as you know. I play games, write a script about the games, then make a video multiple months later. And this week I tried Return of the Obra Dinn. I can't think of the best way to describe this game, so let's call it a murder mystery and leave it at that. Although, the twist is that you are not trying to figure out who the killer is as much as you are trying to figure out how they died, when they died, and of course, who actually died. The game was made by Lucas Pope, and no, not the guy in the Vatican City. No, this Pope was behind the amazing game known as Papers, Please, that was treated by the gaming community at the time the same way that Keanu Reeves currently is. That is to say, as some kind of messiah that will save gamers from whatever normie-caused apocalypse they can imagine. You play as an insurance investigator in the employ of the East India Trading Company, and no, they aren't the villains here, at least not directly. Your job is to investigate this ship that has returned after a period of being missing, and you are to investigate what happened to the crew and whether anyone is deserving of recompense, punishment, or docked wages. You'd think this would be pretty hard, as unless the crew didn't move the corpses around after they died and didn't tidy up all the blood, there would be a severe shortage of evidence. Thankfully, however, before the story begins, a former member of the crew contacts you and wants you to discover the full story. And to do this, he gives you a magical stopwatch, which I continually call the compass, that allows you to visit the few moments before someone dies. I, however, won't be going any further into that side of the story as it is spoilers, and it is the whole incentive for you discovering how everyone died, or didn't die, is that you get to explore this angle and get the true ending. And thus, unless I had some kind of lapse in judgment while making the video to accompany this script, there won't be any footage pertaining to the true ending and the bargain chapter. Now this might sound quite simple. Like a walking simulator awfully reminiscent of a piratey version of What Remains of Edith Finch, but you are gravely mistaken. See, in reality, this game is one big gigantic logic puzzle. With the exception of the initial tutorial murder of the captain by his first mate who then goes to sit by his wife's corpse, you have no idea who these dead people are. You have a list of 60 names which you have to attribute to each person. On top of that, you need to confirm who shot who, where X and Y person disappeared, and what actually landed the killing blow. A large proportion of which are not always possible with what you are given, and it just keeps going on and on. Each character has their own difficulty rating to discover who they are, and this is done out of 3 tiers. Tier 1, they are either directly named or referenced by speech or their surroundings. You should know who these characters are and shouldn't get stuck, but you probably will. Actually, there was a Tier 1 character that I couldn't figure out until I was on to the last 10 in-game characters. Following that is of course Tier 2. There's something about these characters that categorizes them. The clues are in their environments or their clothes, or the clues come from memories they are not directly in, i.e. someone mentions their brother dying in such and such way. These are where you do get stuck. And finally there is Tier 3. These are your process of elimination characters, such as this character is the only remaining member of the Formosan delegation. He's carrying a book, so he must be the accountant, and so on. Or you will have to guess, and whether that is out of creator laziness or artificial difficulty depends on your cynicism. Tier 3 is where you should be getting stuck. Now, if you didn't get the hint from me saying stuck so many times you think I was a kid playing stuck in the mud on the playground, this game is hard, painfully so, but with a few tips, such as checking your environment for things such as hammock tags and who is on the rigging, you do suddenly start getting the hang of things, and the game does take off in the final stretch, making you feel like a genuine genius, even when accompanied by chat who's continually trying to make you feel dumb. However, this logic puzzle will throw you a bone every so often. When you get 3 fates correct, you get one of the best themes ever play, and those fates are hard confirmed for you. And that brings us nicely onto the soundtrack, which in this game is very good, although very limited. There is a track for each story chapter, and you could tell they have been designed with each chapter in mind, which is nice. There is something undeniably special about a soundtrack for each event, which is why boss themes are so amazing in most other games. And on the topic of being designed specifically for something, the soundtrack in this game does have an overbearingly navy feel to it. I'm not sure how they do it, and whether it only feels that way because I know the soundtrack is associated with a ship-based game, but you don't hear a track and think, you know what, I could see myself dancing to this in a club. However, I did mention before that the soundtrack is limited. There are some songs you will hear a lot, and not because they naturally play a lot, but because they are the themes of the chapters you are the most stuck on. At the same time, there's some themes you will hear once because you instantly click everything you need to from that scene. And this is a real shame, as after listening to the soundtrack while writing this, there are some songs which are really good that I do not remember because they were from the easier scenes. And now we move on to my favourite part, the art style, which in this game speaks for itself. It's so stylised it makes Persona 5's design seem mainstream. I guess the game's art style is pretty, or at least that's the word I'm going to use. The world is amazingly designed, as are the characters and the creatures you see throughout the story. But it can hurt one's eyes, especially at first and permanently with certain colour schemes. I really wish I could critique the visuals more. The game is a living sketchbook of the ship and the crew, a point emphasised by the fact you use the sketches done by the crew's artists to identify people. The imagery that it's trying to invoke is quite powerful, such as the way memories are constructed within this black abyss rather than just as part of the ship. And later on in the story, there's a bit where they're on lifeboats and you walk on water rather than on the boat. And this felt amazing after multiple hours on the ship. I feel the voice acting is also worth mentioning, as it was very on point. I have found with lower budget games, and some high budget games, that shorter lines are delivered poorly to an almost comical extent. And I was expecting a lot of these bad takes, considering those who do speak do so once or twice at most. Thankfully that was not the case, and I felt generally enthralled by each and every memory and the game as a whole. And now for some token negatives so that I can claim my neutrality as a reviewer. The writing in this game is good as you experience it, but when you realise how short the story actually is and how little almost all characters are developed, it does feel like a bunch of random events tied together. It doesn't feel like a short story as much as it does a rush story, leaving it feeling like the last season of Game of Thrones. However, I should stress I didn't feel this while playing the game, only when looking back at it. If it weren't for the fact they relied on deaths to go back in time, maybe some episodes involving the escapees discussing where they're going later in the story, or just general character development would have been a nice touch, but the way they designed the game left this impossible to do. Mechanics wise, the guesswork you have to do is terrible. As mentioned, if that's intentional, that was evil and pointless. There's some things I get, like with guessing the names of the Formosan crew as nobody actually talked to them. But there's a group, the top men I believe, although I might be misremembering, where it felt like I was just switching their names around until I got enough matches to trigger the 3-person confirmation. Also, I feel a tutorial on reading the environment, perhaps with a helmsman behind the wheel or something like that, would have shortened the hours of questioning what to do next that occurred after going through all the memories. And with the negatives out the way, I feel confident in moving on to everyone's favourite part, the totally legitimate numerical score. I give this game proudly a score of less than enough tentacles over the crew's collective orifices, which translates roughly into meaning the game is good but far from perfect. I recommend this game for those with an inquisitive and curious mind, or in less words, clever people. This game is difficult and is essentially one gigantic puzzle. Although I feel going in with my few tips and an expectation of having to guess at some point might make this game easier to get into. And that is it for TWIT number 4, where I hope I have been less of a bore. I think, after some accidental experimenting with the last video, I have managed to fix the me sounding so quiet issue. However, this now means you can hear my guttural noises a hell of a lot more. I'm trying to get around this, so bear with me. As always, any tips or advice or feedback would be loved in the comments. And I will always try to respond to all my comments, especially at the moment where I have no real excuse. As well as comments, it would mean the world to me if you could please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so you get notifications when I release these videos if YouTube decides to work for once. And of course, I will perpetually shout out my socials. My wonderful Twitter @JamieGames, where I just share smut and or complain about stuff. And the favourite channel, twitch.tv/JamieGames, where I stream every day at 6 PM GMT. And with that out the way, until next time, this is Cheerio.